Today's speaker, Bill Meyer. Let's get a slide up there for Bill. What doesn't come through on that slide is Bill's enthusiasm for Rotary and all the wisdom in that head. When I was club secretary during his president year, I will never forget his calm and steadfast leadership. Projects that Bill takes on are performed fully and professionally. And as someone who's not shaving for No Shave November, a wonderful looking beard. Here to talk about his latest passion is past president, Bill Meyer.
Well, hello, everyone, again. A few weeks ago, I was up here and announced to the club one of our latest projects, which is to work on maintaining and hopefully restoring the pillars at the corner of 287 and Arapahoe Road. And we've got a working group, and that working group is going strong. But I'm not here today to talk about what the working group is doing. Instead, Chad asked me to talk about the history that underlies those pillars. And so I'd like to spend a few minutes today just talking about how those pillars came to be and the history behind them. Now, we just sang all of the anthems, which is always one of my favorite meetings of the year. And that's because it's Veterans Day. And Veterans Day was yesterday, November 11th, and as I imagine everybody in the room knows, November 11th was the day that World War I ended. The 11th month, the 11th day, the 11th hour. So how do the pillars fit into Veterans Day? There's an unseen heritage that many of us have never seen. I hadn't seen it until a couple of months ago, that starts to explain why the pillars are relevant to Veterans Day in World War I. On the north pillar, where that arrow was, there's a plaque. It's now behind a hurricane fence, sort of stuck in the pucker bush back there. The plaque reads, and I reprinted it on the right side, Road of Remembrance Gateway, in honor of those who served in the World War, not World War I. At that time, they only thought there was going to be one World War. Erected by the Lions Club of Boulder, 1928. How did that come about? Well, for me, the starting point was America's new love affair in the teens, in the 19-teens, with the automobile. With the advent of the automobile, tourists started hitting the road. Prior to that, you had to take a train somewhere, but when there were cars, people could actually get out and drive someplace, and it was revolutionary. They could camp, they could go wherever they wanted to go. There was only one small problem. The roads, to the extent they even existed, were abominable. There simply were, other than in a few big cities, no good roads for driving on. So a solution was proposed. The first of several national highways was proposed by a group out of Detroit to be the Lincoln Highway, to be an all-weather road all the way from New York to San Francisco. So people in those brand new cars could go gliding along at 35 to 40 miles an hour all the way to San Francisco. Well, this was a huge deal as you can imagine. And Colorado fought desperately to be part of the Lincoln Highway. There was a group of overseers that the Lincoln Highway Committee sent out to try and find the best roads and the most direct route between New York and San Francisco. And they came to Colorado, and the governor wined and dined them, and the Chamber of Commerce in Denver wined and dined them. They tried to take them over the mountains to the western slope, and it was a huge debacle. So the overseers were not terribly thrilled at the notion. But after intense lobbying, including the congressional delegation, Colorado convinced them to include in the Lincoln Highway, or with the Lincoln Highway, the so-called Colorado Loop. Well, what was the Colorado Loop? Well, here's the Lincoln Highway as it was announced, but you see there's one place, actually two, but one of the two places where it divided, sort of, was at Big Springs, Nebraska. I think most of us, if you've ever gone west or gone east, have been by Big Springs. Well, the Colorado Loop was from Big Springs down to Denver and then back up north to Cheyenne. Well, that was a tremendous, tremendous win for Colorado. And for Boulder County in particular, because the road from Denver to Cheyenne went north through Boulder County. And Boulder County businessmen and politicians were incredibly excited. I mean, here we are, we're on the map. At that same time, in 1915, there was another event that played into this. That was the opening of Rocky Mountain National Park. Again, you've got all these tourists eager to go somewhere. Road opening up, and a brand new park, which we all know was one of the most beautiful, not the most beautiful in the country, just opening. So this was a big, big deal. Well, what happened next? War with Germany. Everything sort of got shut down for 2+ years. The war was over. So there was a bit of a hiatus. But when the war was over and they started putting the road together, there was a problem for Boulder. The road went from Lafayette through some twists and turns to Longmont. Boulder was 10 miles away, nowhere near the Lincoln Highway. The connection was Arapahoe Road, which at that time was also called the Valley Road, and it was a dusty dirt road. Passable from time to time, but other times not passable. And for people who were on the Lincoln Highway to go to Boulder, they turned at what's called 10 Mile Corner. It's now 111th and Arapahoe Road. Now, since Boulder had this problem, several forces came together to help solve the problem. The first of all places came from the American Forestry Association. The executive director of the American Forestry Association proposed that in honor of the veterans who were returning from World War I, that various localities, counties, whatever, create roads of remembrance, tree-lined roads of remembrance for to honor the veterans and to also beautify the highways. These admonitions, these proposals were picked up by editorial writers all over the country. And if you go back and research many of the papers, you'll see editorials from New York to San Francisco and everywhere in between about creating roads of remembrance. A second event that occurred was the formation of the American Legion. The American Legion didn't exist prior to World War I. The American Legion was formed after World War I in, of all places, Paris, and was limited to those individuals who had served in active duty overseas during World War I. The Legion took up the cause. Obviously, this notion of Road of Remembrance was something that Legionnaires heartily endorsed, and they took up the cause of planting trees, creating roads of remembrance. In fact, the first commander of the American Legion who had proposed this was killed in a car accident, and so the Legion became even more eager to create roads of remembrance in his honor. And it wasn't long before the notion of roads of remembrance and the Lincoln Highway started to come together. And it also wasn't long before the idea of a road for remembrance made its way to Boulder County. Another force, and I will call him a force, that came into play here was a gentleman named Edgar Brotten Hill, E.B. Hill. He was a silver miner in the mountains, but I think it was in 1919, one of the county commissioners resigned or retired, and E.B. Hill was appointed to be a county commissioner for District 1, which encompassed the southern part of Boulder County, down on the plains. Now, the number one job of a county commissioner in those days was to maintain the roads. In fact, they were oftentimes called road commissioners rather than county commissioners. So E.B. Hill now had jurisdiction over the area that encompasses Boulder, Lafayette, up to Longmont. Now, they also had another set of allies. There was something started in about 1920 called the Better Roads Movement. And the Better Roads Movement were civic-minded individuals who wanted to see the roads improved. We're not talking about national highways, we're talking about here and now, because the local roads were still horrible. Boulder formed a Boulder Rotary. Boulder Rotary formed a Boulder Rotary Better Roads Committee. It was led by a gentleman named David Hull Holmes. Now, if that name sounds familiar to some of you, down near campus, I think it's on 11th Street, is the Holmes House, which is is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. David Hull Holmes was an architect, a renowned architect, but he was also an activist. And he led the movement here in Boulder for better roads. And Boulder Rotary was in the thick of it. This is a predecessor to the RIB from 1920, I think, maybe 1919. I'd love to just spend the day talking about that. I mean, I love the new members that are being proposed at the bottom. Relevant to this story, that day, the Boulder Better Roads Committee, Boulder Rotary Better Roads Committee, was having a meeting. Harry Cassidy, who was I forget, I think he was out of Denver, to talk to him. City manager, director, everybody in town showed up to hear about it. And what came out of all that was a plan for Boulder's Road of Remembrance. The plan called for an erection or construction of an arch or monument at 10 Mile Corner with the planting of shade trees on both sides. I mean, it was grandiose. I mean, I'm not going to read it all. You can read the description of what was planned. But the Road of Remembrance was to be a phenomenal undertaking. As you can see, that takes a lot of work and a lot of money. And at that point in time, remember, Arapahoe Road was just a dusty track, if you will, the valley road from Boulder out to 10 Mile Corner. Now, there were also problems on the Lincoln Highway. Now, this has nothing to do with the pillars. I mean, it has nothing to do with the pillars, but I just loved when I was doing my research when I found out about this. I've actually suggested to Sylvia that this would be a great, great story for her to pick up and run with someday. I mean, the soft drink parlors on the Lincoln Highway around Lafayette, which turned into speakeasies, were a problem. But there were other problems that do relate to the pillars. And that's the danger. You look at that road, this was the Lincoln Highway, and it had many curves. And as cars got better and drivers started going faster, and the soft drink parlors started serving more soft drinks, there were more and more and more accidents on that very curvy, very dangerous road. And this is a sampling of some of the articles I found talking about what was going on the Lincoln Highway. And soon the Better Roads Committee and others, including E.B. Hill, decided they needed to do something about it. So E.B. Hill's plan that he came up with was to put a new road in between Lafayette and Longmont. But this road, instead of turning it, the turn for 111th is at the Lafayette Cemetery. Those of you that know that area, that's where 111th start. Instead of turning, you keep going out on baseline, basically to where 287 is now, and go straight up to what's now Highway 52, where the road into Longmont was straight. It'd be straight, be safe, wonderful idea. Well, that also meant that the notion of having a turn at 10 Mile Corner would be eliminated. And instead, once the new road was built, the turn would be at 9 Mile Corner. Now, you might think that would have been a no-brainer. It was not. The battles, as you'll see in a minute, were ferocious. Lafayette and Longmont fought it. The chambers of commerce didn't want it. They knew what was going on. If that road went in, you're moving the turn to Boulder, only 3/4 of a mile west, but you know, the camel's nose under the tent, they didn't want it to happen. Ultimately, the state stepped in, agreed that the road needed to be changed, and started a condemnation action. And about a third of the farmers along the way fought. They didn't want that road going up through their pristine farms. Because there was no road there. This was a brand new road. What's now 287 was a brand new road. Interestingly enough, the leader of the farmers was a gentleman from Canfield. Does Canfield mean anything, buddy? It's a non-existent now town just west of Erie, named J.O.V. Wise. And again, any of you that know the Wise Homestead Museum, which is owned by the Erie Historical Society, his farmstead has been preserved just east of the current 287. In any event, they went to a trial. The state won, as the state always wins, and the land was condemned. But there was another battle yet to be fought. By this time, we're now into the mid-20s. And as you see, E.B. Hill, County Commissioner, proudly announcing, over 1 million cars annually travel the Lincoln Highway up to go to Rocky Mountain National Park and points north. But only a quarter of them turned west at 10 Mile Corner to go to Boulder. In other words, 3/4 of the traffic that would go up to Longmont and then turn west to go up to Estes Park was going that route. Only a quarter was coming to Boulder and going up to Lyons up along the foothills. Well, the Boulder business community didn't like that at all. That was unacceptable. So they started a program to get people to make the left turn. We're still at 10 Mile Corner, of course, because the road hadn't been built. So Longmont had multiple grievances. One was a secret meeting between David Holmes and the Good Roads Committee with the State Roads Commissioner, at which all sorts of nefarious schemes, at least according to Longmont, were being hatched. Another was Boulder distributed 40,000 maps, of which Longmont said, quote, "The aged or infirm, without the aid of a powerful finding glass, could not possibly locate Longmont on the map used by Boulder." The war was on. And it really got heated in the summer of 1925 when Boulder put up a hut at 10 Mile Corner, manned by a guy named David Fairchild, a Boulder Legionnaire, who described as a rather genial and fluent talker. He was armed with road maps, and at least according to the Longmont folks, Fairchild was trying to convince people to turn left at 10 Mile Corner. Go this way. You don't want to go to Longmont. Lying about Longmont, you know, it's horrible, et cetera, et cetera. Well, mysteriously, one night, the hut burned down. No one took responsibility for it. The accusations flew back and forth between Longmont and Boulder. One of my favorite one was this quote. Others said that the fire started due to an overabundance of Boulder hot air. Never been established who or how the fire started. In any event, Boulder came up with a secret weapon. Not so secret, a new weapon, I'll call it that way. The new road was being designed to go up north by the county resident state highway engineer for this region, a gentleman named Douglas, who was working hand in glove with E.B. Hill. Douglas, state engineer, came up with this design for the corner of 9 Mile, the 9 Mile corner. And this is, north is to your left. The idea was to create this majestic Y, as they referred to it. And, whoops. The triangle, which will be formed between those two arcs, will be made into a park. And where the two arcs meet, a stone gateway, somewhat similar to that which guards the entrance to the Denver Mountain Parks in Golden, will be erected. And the rationale had little to do with the veterans or memorializing World War I. The rationale was to instinctively attract motorists to turn left and go to Boulder. So Fairchild didn't have to stand out there. They didn't have to have huts out there to burn. It would be so beautiful that tourists would automatically turn left rather than head on up to Longmont. So the gateway pillars were ultimately built. The funding was handled by the Lions Club. Donations came from all parts of the city of Boulder, society, service clubs. I'm still working on it. I think the city, I think Rotary probably put in some money, but $1,300 is a fair amount of money in those days. The pillars were designed by Meade Walter, a Boulder architect and a member of the Lions Club. They were patterned after the stone gateways on the Lookout Mountain Park and using stone similar to that then being used on the campus at CU. These are the gate. This is the gateway at Lookout Mountain Park. I don't know how many of you have ever been up there. The pillars were constructed by Leroy Watson. Now, Chris Watson is joining us today, his granddaughter, on Zoom. Leroy was a renowned stonemason in this area, built a number of the structures up at St. Malo, which most of us know about. And so those pillars were built in 1928. The cornerstone was laid in April, I think April 18th, if I'm not mistaken, 1928. And there was a ceremony, a significant ceremony out there. But the big ceremony came at the dedication, which was in June, 2 months later. Over 1,000 people attended. The Boulder City Band played. There were dignitaries from all over, including the Lions International president, came all the way out from the East Coast to dedicate these pillars. It was, at that time, a huge event. Here's the dedication. There's a picture taken of the dedication. It's not the greatest picture. I believe the shorter, dark-haired guy next to the taller guy, sort of in the middle, I think that's David Hall Holmes. I can't be sure, but it sure looks like him. I think he's standing next to E.B. Hill. But the pillars were dedicated in June 1928. But there was one other piece to this story. Remember when I showed you the diagram that Douglas put together, he talked about the park, the triangular park. Well, to step back a minute, at the end of World War I, the American Expeditionary Forces brought back thousands of trophies, they called them. There was a huge lot or field, I believe in New Jersey, filled with German cannons and all sorts of things. A big fight over who got those. And of course, the American Legion weighed in. The Legion wanted to have access to those so they could display them wherever they chose. It actually, after 3 years of debate, took 3 years, Congress passed a law to provide for the equitable distribution of captured war devices and trophies to the states and territories in the District of Columbia. And so commissions were created all over so that these cannons would be equitably distributed. The Boulder Legion Post number 10, got 4 cannons. It turns out that only 3 of them were actually German, 1 of them was French, and why they got a, quote, captured French cannon, again, that's another story I've not been able to unravel yet. But in any event, they got 4 cannons. Well, one of them they put in the park, along with a flagpole and some trees, which they planted. So the Gateway Park, which is in that triangle, just east of the pillars where the 2 sweeping Ys spread out, became the Gateway Park. That was built in 1929, the following year, by the Boulder American Legion Post 10. They actually leased the ground from the county and put the cannon up, put the other amenities up at a cost of about $1,000. And at that point, Boulder had its Road of Remembrance, built to honor the men and women who served in World War I. At the dedication of that monument, it was said that the gateway was an indication that Boulder had not forgotten those who had served the country during World War I and would be an inspiration for those to serve in the future. That was the commitment in 1928. And this is where I'll let the story end. This is today's challenge, to see if we can still honor that commitment. I want to give special thanks to Sylvia, who did the original research to keep the Gateway story alive, and Barbara and the Boulder Historical Society, Museum of Boulder, and the Carnegie Library, which has provided many of the photos and documents you saw here today. Thank you. I hope this has been informative and answer any questions.
When was the cannon removed from the triangle?
So the people on Zoom can hear it, why don't you let him?
Sorry. When was the cannon removed from the triangle?
The cannon was removed in 1973. Brad, are you here? Brad Weasley here today? I didn't see Brad. Brad was a rookie patrolman on the Lafayette Police Force and loves to tell stories about, quote, scraping drunks off the cannon between midnight and 3 a.m. The cannon was repeatedly, again, there was a Y, and so people coming, particularly people coming north that wanted to make a left-hand turn in the 60s and 70s when you're talking about 65, 70 mile an hour vehicles, oftentimes didn't make that corner. And the cannon just got beat to a pulp. And ultimately, after one last crash in 1973, the cannon was removed and it was scrapped. It was no longer of any value.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the building of this triangle in 1928 was a strategic inflection point in the architecture of American roads. When we're, for example, driving down the diagonal at 55 or 65 miles an hour and we have to stop in the middle of the countryside for the traffic lights. I'm just wondering if there was any discussion at the time to put in their place in 1928 a roundabout.
Well, again, from what I've been able to read, the reason that was put in was, as I displayed, to instinctively attract people to turn west. Today, that sort of road design would be instantly thrown out because it violates about 25 different safety standards. But in those days, there were no safety standards. It was, you know, whatever you wanted to make. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful.
Bill, John got you over here.
Oh, there you
I'm
go.
sorry, yeah. First of all, I thought it was really interesting, too, that the cannon was directly pointed west, right down that highway. I thought that, you know, somebody was really thinking there. But what the comment I wanted to make was, you know, for years, I can't remember, I think I joined Rotary in 1985 or whatever, but yeah, I've always kind of felt sorry for the Lions because as our history goes, we were started because there were 4 members of the Lions Club who walked out of a meeting one day who was very disgruntled with the Lions. And of course, you know, we were chartered in 1919 around this same period of time. So I just feel good seeing that the Lions, in fact, did do some neat things and that Rotary worked together with them. So I just wanted to comment on that. So thank you for all your great research.
Yeah, well, part of the reason I wanted to pick this up and why we formed the working group here is Boulder Lions no longer exist. They can't be involved in the future. So as they're, I don't know, since they're part of our legacy, I'll put it that way, it seems appropriate that we pick up the cudgel and see if we can help resolve some of the issues that are out there right now.
Does the committee have any initial thoughts on what they might like to do with the existing space?
Well, how should I phrase this? The state has now acknowledged that they inadvertently screwed up when they issued the permit to have the developer of 9 Mile Corner Development build that new design. As of Monday of this week, the CDOT, Colorado Department of Transportation, issued a letter to the State Historical Preservation Office acknowledging that they should have done a historical preservation review before issuing that permit, and setting up or asking the State Historical Preservation Office, who's sort of the guru over all of these things, to allow CDOT to form a consultation group to come up with, quote, a mitigation plan to see what can be done to resolve the issues out there. Our working group, Boulder Rotary Working Group, is on that list of people to be involved in the consultation group. At this point, CDOT has no plan per se, other than to bring the stakeholders together, Erie, Lafayette, Boulder County, and try and come up with a plan. What that plan will be, they're all over the map, the ideas, but what it might turn out to be, I don't know.
Bill, what a marvelous piece of history and remarkable research on your part. I found that fascinating. I particularly, as someone who's recently moved from Boulder to Longmont, I found the byplay between those two cities to be particularly interesting, and I probably appreciate it more now as a Longmont resident. I also really liked the involvement of Boulder Rotary and the leaders of Boulder Rotary in the story. And I found myself wondering, could they have imagined at that time, 100 years later, that we would be talking about their work and their accomplishments, and whether they could have imagined what 9 Mile Corner looks like today. And that led me to a further thought: what is Boulder Rotary going to be talking about what we were doing right now? So maybe that's a challenge for us moving forward. So you know the drill from the response. You probably delivered it as many times as anybody in this club. So I won't go through the whole thing other than to say that we are donating 100 doses of the polio vaccine to the Polio Plus Fund in your honor, and in order to narrow this much closer to eradicating polio. Thank you, Bill.